Thanks, Kelsey. Hi, guys. I'm Ben Zander. I'm here with John Donohue and Chris Fisher, co-chairman of the Advisory Commission on Social Justice, Race, and Educational Attainment. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Our pleasure. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. Okay, so what information about Paul Lozier's past was uncovered that indicated changing the name of Lozier Hall was a wise decision?
It was actually information that was uncovered by the work of my colleague, Robert McGreevy. He and his students were doing research down in the Trenton archives. And they kept coming across these documents of conversations between Paul Lozier, who was the superintendent of Trenton schools. And they kept coming across these instances where people were asking to be moved to different schools. And Paul Lozier was saying, no, I cannot move you. I will not move you because it's against our policy. And he's very clear that it was against his policy. Now, the problem is, and he was saying it was against the policy of segregation. So he was observing a policy of segregation, and this was in the 1930s, late 1930s that this was happening. He was observing this policy of segregation when New Jersey, as a state, had already outlawed segregation in public schools.
Wow.
So, this was a revelation to our students and our faculty, who then began to say, well, okay, is this the same Paul Lozier, whose name is on the admissions building at TCNJ? And they did some more research and found out that, yes, it was the very one and the same Paul Lozier. So they began bringing it up on campus. It became a hot-button issue, and President Gittenstein decided to look into it. That was her first inclination. Let's just look into this. And as we looked into it, it raised some troubling questions.
What kind of questions did it raise?
It raised questions about, what kind of message are we sending to students who are entering TCNJ, whether this was consistent with the values of the institution. It raised questions about how we approach the past, whether, if we made a decision to act on this in a way that was reactive. Was this a violation of the past? Was it a race in the past? So it raised all kinds of big questions. And so she just wanted to investigate it, and she wanted to get to the bottom of it, and she was open-ended. She had an open-ended attitude toward whatever the outcome would be. Whatever we came to, whatever conclusion we came to, she was going to weigh it seriously. She couldn't make the decision unilaterally, but she was going to weigh it seriously. So she asked myself and John to lead this commission. We worked with other members of the campus community, with students, staff, faculty. We also had Professor McGreevy, who was the faculty member whose students found the work, and the student who actually found the work.
Wow.
In the Trenton archives. We also had members from the community come in, and we began to have just a big conversation about what it means to change names, what it means to confront your past, whether you can undo a past wrong, whether you're sanitizing history by doing it. It was a very rich conversation. And that was just the conversation we had internal among ourselves. John, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you've captured it pretty well. I think one of the really important pieces to recognize here is that we did not go in with a preconceived notion of what the outcome would be. President Gittenstein was very clear. She wanted to hear from many voices. She wanted as much information uncovered as possible to provide her with a strong recommendation one way or another, and then she would consider it. And I think one of the things Chris mentioned earlier on, she couldn't make that decision unilaterally. That's a decision, putting a name on or taking a name off a building lies with the Board of Trustees. So ultimately, we would make a recommendation to her. She would either accept or reject it. In our case, she accepted it. And then she would then bring forth to the Board of Trustees a recommendation to change the name of the building, which is ultimately what occurred.
Mm-hmm. So his name was on an admissions building. Obviously, he contributed a lot to the growth and making the College of New Jersey thrive. So After uncovering all of this, was it tough to say that, we should go ahead and change this even after everything that he did for the college?
Well, I think from the onset, our charge was to come up with the right and best conclusion, and if that meant, doing something that would include impacting the Lozier name, that might occur. Clearly, the Loziers were very supportive of the college. Tom and Carol Lozier were pillars of the community. Tom's brother, Peter, was an active member of the college foundation board back in those days. In those early days, $1 million gift was significant to the college. What was really interesting was the gift was not initially tied to the naming of the building. It was something that the college elected to do. So the Loziers really just wanted to help the institution. We put the name on the building in recognition. Keep in mind, this is back in the day where you couldn't just Google something and find it, So I think, our students, spent a good amount of time digging through archives trying to understand. Those aren't necessarily the things that happened back then when you were putting a name on a building. So a lot of the things that were uncovered and we learned recently were things that most of us, and if not all of us, were unfamiliar with. So when we did start to do the work, we reached out to the Lozier family. I spoke with Carol Lozier, Tom Lozier, Tom Lozier was the donor. He and his wife Carol. Paul was his father. So I spoke with Carol and let her know what we were doing. Clearly, she was disappointed. One of the interesting things was she said, she wasn't even aware, of her father-in-law's past. But she said those aren't the kind of things you sit around the dinner table talking about. She just didn't know.
Right.
Tom had passed away maybe 2 years ago. I spoke with Peter Lozier. I spoke with other members of the family, and clearly they were disappointed to learn some of the things about their grandfather and father-in-law. They understood that we had a task ahead of us. When it came time to make the recommendation, people brought into the equation the $5 million gift that the Loziers made to the college, and that had nothing to do with the first gift. The $5 million gift that they gave was to name the deanship in the School of Nursing. They believed in our nursing program. They wanted it to thrive. And in the conversations we had with Carol, throughout this whole process, she said, whatever the outcome is, we believed in this institution. We believe in this institution. So, it was, it was difficult, but only difficult because we were talking to a friend, and somebody that we did not want to. They had no influence, no control over what had happened back in the 30s and the 40s, we did not want to tarnish the entire Lozier name, because the Loziers have been philanthropists throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania for years, supporting many, many organizations. So, we engaged in this conversation throughout the process. Difficult, sure, but the Loziers were very supportive, and Dr. Gittenstein had numerous conversations with them as well.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that the Loziers were supportive. How about the members of the college, students, faculty, even members of the community?
They were varied, as you can well imagine. There were some who felt right from the onset that it should happen immediately. There should be no question. There was no need to do research. There were other folks who wanted to take plenty of time. It was interesting, and Chris might want to expand on this, but as we were talking to people in the community, and particularly in the communities of color, one of their big concerns about changing the name was it's just erasing something so you forget about it. And in their mind, it's important to be able to remember those moments so you don't repeat those kinds of things.
When we went down into Trenton and we began to talk with people in the Trenton community, there's two things that I found interesting. One, as John said, they were reluctant to advocate changing the name of Lozier Hall, primarily because they didn't want to erase the past, and in particular, erase the past that they understood of Trenton's relationship with TCNJ / Trenton State College. So what we found was that in our engagement with them, that conversation about Lozier became a conversation about a greater distance that TCNJ, they believe, had from Trenton, the community. And there was a lot of hurt feelings there, a lot of wounds there. So that was one of the things that we learned. The other thing was that for a lot of the population that we met with directly, they didn't even know about it. So there's a generational divide. There were older people in Trenton who knew about it, and they weren't shocked. This wasn't surprising to them. They're like, how long, it took you long enough to get here. But for the younger people, they're like, that we didn't know about it, and it still doesn't change the fact that the institution itself has this distant relationship with the community, and you can change the name, but it does nothing about that history and that relationship that we as a community have with Trenton.
When I arrived here at TCNJ 5 years ago, one of the things I heard about was the name change from Trenton State College to the College in New Jersey, and how a lot of alumni and a lot of people in the community were really troubled by that. And when we talked to people, that was like the final nail in the coffin. It's like, you were in Trenton, you moved out of Trenton. You used to have lots of Trenton students, now you have few Trenton students. You changed your name. You've totally disassociated with the community. And they were hurt by that. And I think that kind of hurt us too when we realized that that really had happened. We had kind of migrated away from that community over the years. And I think the really important questions that came out, clearly the name on the building was an important question, but what became more important was, what kind of institution we are, what kind of institution we want to be, what kind of relationship we want to have with our community. As a regional public institution, we have an obligation of responsibility to the communities that surround us. And in some ways, we had started to slip away from that. So the dialogue kind of shifted. Okay, the name is one piece, but how do we re-engage? How do we be more supportive of the Trenton community, the public schools, so we can help more students become college ready? How can we help provide better services to the community? How can we get the community to come out here to the college to participate in events, sporting events, events over Mayo Concert Hall? It also uncovered some issues here on the campus, just in the way students and faculty interact. And we realized that, while we talk and we've worked really hard at diversity and inclusion and engagement, there was a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And just to add, it was such a revelation what we learned about how the community of Trenton felt about their relationship with TCNJ and that history, that we realized that when we went back to campus and began having a conversation about what was going on, everyone was fixated on Lozier Hall. And we realized that it was an obstacle to us actually getting to the issues that mattered to the people in Trenton.
Wow.
Which is the reason why there was an expedited decision to actually deal with the name change. We dealt with it earlier because we wanted to get the community here on campus focused on repairing that relationship with Trenton and Ewing.
Okay. So was making the name Trenton, is that an effort to repair those relationships with Trenton?
We had numerous conversations within the commission and with folks outside in terms of what some of the various names might be. Everything from Trenton State College Hall to Trenton State Hall, to Hedgepeth Williams Hall, to Admissions Hall, to Heritage Hall, to Lions Hall, a whole bunch of things. But one of the things we really came to realize was that if we really want to reconnect with the city, we have to do something significant. There was nothing on this campus that said Trenton. So, Dr. Gittenstein selected from amongst those choices Trenton Hall to be really, symbolic of a moment. And also, I think it helped address one of the concerns that we heard in the community, that people will forget about this moment. If we turned it into Lions Hall or Admissions Hall, that's like completely erasing anything that had happened. But by Trenton Hall, one of the things we intend to do is we're going to take that whole first level, well, most of the first level I imagine, and turn that into a history of TCNJ and Trenton community. So it really seemed appropriate. I was really happy with that choice that she made.
And what were some of the reactions that you got from the community to actually changing the name to Trenton Hall?
Well, they varied, but for the most part, very positive. I remember talking to faculty members who just or listening to faculty members, hearing them talk as I was walking by, saying, I just heard, some students who were taking the student orientation or who were visiting the campus say Trenton Hall without even skipping a beat. There was nothing unusual about it. It wasn't nothing new. It was just normal. And the faculty member was talking about how proud she was that she had been a part of that change, and that it did nothing to upset the campus community. that it was a dialogue, that we talked to each other as a community, that we sat down, democracy works, we talked to each other, and we reached a reasonable conclusion that our community arrived at together. John, I think, could speak to, some people outside the community who didn't understand, but that's going to happen in any instance.
Yeah, one of the things we tried hard to do was, communicate with as many folks as we possibly could, and clearly we have, 60,000 plus alumni out there who have, something invested in this, and they were not as familiar with the work as, let's say, folks on campus or locally were. So, we received a good number of, emails and phone calls, and Dr. Gittenstein responded to a good number of those. I responded to a lot of those, and they varied. But, for the most part, as Chris said, people understood what we were doing when we explained to them what some of the history and some of the rationale was, and really what the bigger goals of the commission. The name, like I said, was just one piece of it. The things that you're going to see happening over this year, next couple of years, and perhaps we'll get a chance to talk about that yet in this interview, that's really the important work ahead. And when people kind of heard about that, they kind of stepped back, even those who were skeptical about what we had done. And they said, okay, this is the right decision.
Yeah, and I'll just add at the end of that,
Sure,
because
yeah.
John talked about the way that President Gittenstein went into this endeavor. She was very clear that she was open to whatever recommendations we offered. She was also very clear that she could not make the decision unilaterally. But the thing she was most clear about, and I think that this served us very well, was that we needed to be completely transparent about what we were doing. So everything that we did, as much as we could, we tried to meet with everyone we could, and we tried to give them all the information, as much tedious information as we could, because we didn't want them to feel like we were doing something in the back room or hiding information. And I think that really was helpful, that people felt informed. So when the decision was made and the change came, I don't think anyone felt like it was unusual or like there was anything left to be said.
I think one of the best moments throughout the whole process took place in this very room. We had an open floor at the very end. I think it was the last one we did, and we had 150 people or whatever here. It was packed. People from all over, people from the community, students, faculty, staff members, black, white, everyone. And people getting up and kind of sharing what their thoughts were. Not in an angrily way, but in a very productive and in a very civil way, what their positions were. And I think it demonstrated two things to me. One is that we were capturing the voices of many. And the other thing was the people who were talking to us were really giving serious thought to what the issues were. And not just talking about their own little point of view, but really trying to be open-minded about what the right approach for TCNJ going forward is. The name and the programming that'll follow.
Yeah, and we heard from people from all sides of the political spectrum in this room. That was the other thing that I was most proud of. It wasn't a situation where there was just one group of people from one political perspective who stood up and voiced their opinion and everybody just sort of clapped. We had, across the board, different perspectives. Everybody was given a chance to say their piece, to make their argument be heard, and to be validated. And that, again, one of the things that I was most proud of in this whole process.
I just want to take a couple steps back for a moment. Something that you kept mentioning earlier in the interview was that none of you knew what was going on. His family didn't know what was going on. So what exactly were the students doing when they came across this information about Lozier?
They were posting all around campus signs just saying that Lozier was a segregationist. Signs that were shocking, that were revealing, but in some ways unfair. But I think that was the purpose. The purpose was to make us pay attention. Once we were introduced to what was their complaint, then it was a matter of seeing whether they were valid or not, whether there was anything to it. And then it was a matter of thinking of, well, okay, if there is something to do, what can we do? Because you can't erase the past. You can't make up for it. So what do we do moving forward? Everything that we did was about taking those measured steps and thinking about what is the problem, what resources do we have, and then what can we do, and then how do we do it within the context of our values as a community. And that was, I think, sort of the overriding sort of framework that we work from.
And if I could just take a step back from when those postings started, when the students and Professor McGreevy first were prepared to start talking about this, they called for a meeting with the administration to kind of share some of their findings, so that it wasn't just aha, we got you, and we're going to plaster the campus with postings. So they presented the facts as they found them to President Gittenstein, to our Chief Diversity Officer, to the Provost. Had a very good conversation about that, and that's really when the conversation started. And as students should do, and people should do, they became more activist on their approach. The Committee on Unity, I think that's what they call themselves. They came together, and they continue to push the agenda, and rightfully so, to keep it in the front of everybody's minds. And it really has been, I would say, if you have to take a look at a case study of how you would like these things to unfold, this was actually really quite good. Students uncovered the information, they presented it, they activated. The administration, it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It was a very measured and responsible reaction. The process played out. All parties came together and reached what I think most people, if not all, feel is a good conclusion.
Yeah.
What other projects is the Commission taking on now to further make the campus more fair and equal?
Well, what's happened in the last couple of weeks is that President Gittenstein, she waited till we returned from the summer break. We were to deliver to her a report that talked about everything. One, the name change, but also the revelations that we came to from our conversations on campus and in the community, and make a series of recommendations. She was to receive all of that by June 30th. We delivered the report to her, and I think she, and I can't speak for the president, but it seems reasonable that she would think that since we weren't in session in the summertime, and that so much of our academic year was involved in these intense conversations, she waited until we returned for the fall to actually release the report, which she has done. It's on the website at TCNJ. But also, she put together a task force for implementing the recommendations. Now, of course, the recommendations were laid out in sort of a tiered fashion. There were recommendations that we had on how we should address questions related to TCNJ students who are here, how we should address issues related to repairing our relationship with Trenton, but also how we should deal with the way that faculty, staff, and administrators are connected to these questions of inclusion and diversity. So we made a series of recommendations. She put together a task force for implementation, and as fate would have it, today was the first meeting of the steering committee for that task force.
Wow.
Yeah, so we are in the process of identifying what parts of TCNJ will participate and what recommendations we will implement up front. This is a year of tremendous change because our president is retiring, so we're happy about that, and she wants to go into her retirement having some of these things in force. We're beginning with simple things, things that are within the framework of what we can do as an institution, our resources that we have available to us. So we're looking at ways in which we could think about making closer connections as a community with Trenton. We're also looking at ways that we can make our students more aware of one TCNJ's connection to Trenton, but also the fact that Trenton exists very close to us.
Right.
It's a space that they should visit and not feel alienated from. And then also we want to look at the ways in which we can improve matters of diversity, and this is important, inclusion, because being diverse is one thing, but including people, making them feel like they're part of the community. How we can do that among faculty, staff, and administrators. John, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you've captured it. It's an aggressive agenda for the first year. Chris, myself, President Gittenstein, and Christina Rios from the President's office are on the steering committee. We're going to be managing this to make sure it stays on track. Other folks will be identified in the next couple of days. We've identified them. Calls are going to them to point them to the implementation task force. And I think in the next couple of months, you'll start to see some things. There's some things already that are in the works. We're going to be creating opportunities for people from Trenton to come up to TCNJ to learn about the admissions process, financial aid. I've identified a number of organizations that have scholarship funds for people from Trenton that go unexpended every year. So that's, simple things like that, to things that are a little more challenging, such as how do we start to build in the history of Trenton TCNJ, or Trenton State College TCNJ, and the Trenton community into the curriculum, into the orientation programs, those kinds of things. It's going to be an exciting time, and Dr. Gittenstein's fully committed to it, as we are, and it's exciting work.
Yeah, definitely.
Great, thank you. And also, I just want to say, because you mentioned before that this is a really interesting case study, and I agree. I feel like a lot of students, whenever there's an issue, any issue at all, they think, I'm just a student, what am I going to be able to do about this? But what we had here, like you said, was we had students coming together with faculty, members of the community, and really everyone, it sounds like, had a big part in making this change happen, whether you were not just a student, but whether you were a student or a high member of a board.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So again, thank you guys very much for
Thank you.
taking the time
Much
to
appreciated.
talk with us.
Take care.
Thank you. Back to you guys in the studio.